one thing that I wanted to do on this podcast before I started it is just a little background on me. I grew up in a very agnostic family, right? And
Mhm.
my family's whole thing they said to me was, we have no idea what's going on. Go figure it out for yourself.
Mm.
And up into this point, my like knowledge of religion and understanding of the mechanics of it is literally like a first grader. So you're
Mm.
talking to someone with a completely clean slate who wants to use this podcast as an opportunity to talk to people from a bunch of different religions and hear why that has been so beneficial to your life. Because like what I started realizing is it's like, all right, this is an area I've completely ignored, but the whole point of this podcast is to find things that make your life better. And if this is a topic that has been really beneficial for a lot of people, I want to explore. I want to turn that rock over, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think before I'll share my story, but I think for those people who are listening that don't identify as religious or find themselves as agnostic or atheist or whatever, I think the very first question I would ask is if what I told you was true, meaning if Christianity was true, would you follow it? Right? So that's like
Mm-hmm.
out the gate, like that diffuses the conversation, because then if it's true, it changes it reveals your heart, right? If somebody's like, no, F that, I don't want nothing to do with God, I don't want, well, isn't whatever I say next makes no difference, right? But if what I'm saying is true and it opens you up to potentially following it, I think then that's where we could have like an honest conversation about these things, right? So, and that's not necessarily a question for you, because it's not like a
Yeah.
yes or no question. It's just something to be thinking about. Like,
Yeah.
if Jesus is who he said he was, and if he did what I would say history proves he did, would you follow him, or would you still be like, nope, I don't want nothing to do with that guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something I want people to just to hopefully diffuse diffuse the tension in there, right?
Yeah.
Because if it's a no, cool, I'm not mad. Like that's fine.
Yeah.
I would say I grew up in an interesting environment where we came out as religious refugees. My in Azerbaijan, Baku, we were raised in a Muslim state. Armenians, which is what I am, are like
Mm-hmm.
historically Christian. They're really proud about being like the first nation to identify Christianity as like the world, their like country's religion.
Mm-hmm.
So I grow up Armenian Orthodox, which is more or less similar to uh, it's similar to like Catholicism, right? And then in the process, we come out, we're in America as refugees because of this like tension between the RZ Muslims and the Armenians. We get forced out. We come here. My mom and my dad come out here together. They didn't have the most stable marriage. My dad remarries. I'm a part of this Orthodox church. They remarry him. My mom is like, yo, how can you guys remarry him? We're technically not divorced. I grow up super hostile towards the idea of religion because of
Mm-hmm.
this. My dad leaves, my mom gets remarried. The church seems super hypocritical to me. On top of that, I had some sexual trauma kind of connected
Mm-hmm.
to just like bad stuff in the church, just a mess. So I remember
Yeah.
being 10, 11 years old, not being agnostic, being full blown, like, I am an atheist. There is no God. If there was a God, why would he allow all this stuff to happen to me, right? And
Mm-hmm.
slowly, all of a sudden, there was people around me that would be like, yo, we're praying for you. My next door neighbor's mom, my best friend, his mom, was moving drugs, got caught trying to go through the airport with drugs, goes to
Mm-hmm.
prison for like a year and a half, comes back radically born again Christian, like radical, you know? And I'm just like, yo, you're full of crap. Like, you're not really about this life. And so my experience was my whole apartment building gets completely transferred. I'm still like, you guys are crazy. I'm in the streets. I'm getting arrested. I moved to North County, which is the suburbs. And I start I changed my path. I started playing basketball. That was plan A. I thought I was going to go to the NBA, right? Every kid from the hood thinks they're going to
Yeah.
make it as a rapper or go to the ball. And so I thought I was going to make it to the NBA. That didn't work out. At the same time, I'm starting to date this girl. She invites me to church. Only way I could spend time with her on Sunday is if I go to church. I go to this church completely different. The music is different. The vibe is different. The people are different. It's not Orthodox. It's not Catholicism, if you will, right? It's just like church, like I guess you would call like a evangelical type of environment. And then at the same time, I started dating a Jehovah's Witness girl. I'm still agnostic or atheist. I don't know what I am at this point. And so I come into the faith as a skeptic, like, yo, what is the truth? Because these people are telling me this, these people are telling me this. This is what I've grown up believing, hostile to the whole idea of organized religion. And so I started reading books by ex-atheists and ex-agnostics who got radically converted. And I stumbled on this book called The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. Lee Strobel was an investigative journalist for the Chicago Tribune. Wife was a Christian. He gets radically converted in the process of trying to disprove the claims of Jesus. He gets radically converted, and he comes to this notion that either Jesus is who he says he was, either he was Lord, or he was a liar, or he was a lunatic. Either he was God in the flesh and he died and rose and changed everything about history, or he was completely out of his mind and he was a lunatic, or he was a liar and he deceived people. You can't say Jesus was a good teacher. You can't say he was a moral guy. You have to pick one of those three conclusions in the light of history. That is how I came to the faith. It was like really logical, skeptical history. What is this whole thing? And I just literally read that book. I read that, which has been turned into a documentary and a film on Netflix. I would encourage anybody who's a skeptic, go watch that. I also read like a huge book called, it's called The Case for Christ. It's on Netflix. And it's dope. There's a documentary and there's like a movie, like a cinematic movie, like a theatrical movie about Lee Strobel's life story. He's still alive today. He does a bunch of stuff. He like does debates with atheists and all that kind of stuff. And then there's the evidence that demands a verdict. And dude, once I was convinced that like history made more sense for Jesus to be Lord, I literally was like, God, if you're real, Jesus, if you're real, reveal yourself to me. And that's another thing that like, if Christianity is true, would you follow it? Are people willing to pray that prayer, right? Are people, and I was at a point where I came to my wits end. I'm like, dude, if this thing is real, like, because it made sense intellectually. And once I prayed that, man, my life literally just transformed. The trajectory of everything changed. The things that I used to think were whack and corny, like church, like God, I started thinking were amazing. I got this weird hunger to like read the Bible and go to church. My life literally got changed. And here's the thing that most people don't want to talk about. People say, oh, religion's done a lot of bad things. Religion's done a lot of bad things. It controls people. It's divisive. People don't acknowledge the pragmatic side of having faith. In the story, in the book, Power of a Habit, it goes really in depth about the idea of just faith, like how powerful just faith is. If I believe that the creator of the universe is on my side, not as only is he on my side, he actually lived the life I couldn't live. He died the death I should have died. He resurrected and his spirit lives in me. There's nothing that I can't do. And it's pragmatic, meaning that it benefits my life in a really amazing way. It makes me a better husband. It makes me a better father. It makes me a kinder person, more patient person, more loving person. That is what the teachings of Jesus have done in my life. And it's as much about a mindset as it is about like a different, like I'm a different person. And my friends who remember me from back in the day when I was getting arrested, getting in trouble, being an atheist, they see what God has done in my life and they marvel at it because they were like, dude, we were telling you these things and you were like, you guys are crazy. And now, you know, you're this totally different person. And so that's the pragmatic side of it, man. And the faith side, the history side. So it just made more sense. It made more sense that Jesus is who he said he was than the contrary, which was that he was a liar, he was a lunatic, everything is an accident, which is kind of what atheism believes. Is like the whole world just combusted and started and random. Like I just don't think this is all random. Like I don't think that this conversation is random. I don't think this technology is random. I don't think this moment is random. I think there's a creator, a part of it all.
So when you're explaining to me what this is, understand I have zero context. I literally know nothing about. Like
I hope I did a decent job.
Okay, so no, here's what I got. Like, so what I want you to do for me is explain, like, when you say like you're following Jesus or whatever, like, what do you mean by like what does that even mean?
It's a great question. So, would you say you're a fan of Gary Vee?
Yes.
So, would you say you're a follower of Gary Vee's teachings?
Yeah.
So in the same way, I'm a follower of someone's teachings, right? Mm-hmm. Who said, love your neighbor as yourself, do unto others as you'd have done unto you, right? I'm a follower of their teachings. Like if we actually look at what Jesus taught, it was revolutionary for
Mm-hmm.
where he was in space and time. What he taught about loving people of different ethnicities, right? The story, there's a parable of the Good Samaritan, which has a ton of like um, social context that actually applies to our time and space today. The Samaritans, the Jews didn't get along. Jesus tells this crazy story about the Samaritan that the Jews didn't like and how he showed the most amount of mercy to the Jewish man that was beaten by robbers. And he basically said, that's the parable of the Good Samaritan. When we say Good Samaritan laws, that comes from that story, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. So I follow the teachings of Jesus. I follow what he actually said to do, the same way I would say when Gary Vee says, yo, create content, empathy, self-awareness, right? I follow Jesus in that way, but I would take it a step further where I would say, I also believe Jesus when he says, I and the Father are one. I am going to go prepare a place for you. You will tear down this temple, but I will rebuild it in 3 days. And I take it a step further where I say, I also take him at his word through in the Bible and outside of the Bible, right? Because there's non-biblical scholars like Josephus that say there's amazing historical precedent that he actually died. We know he died, but then there's precedent that he rose 3 days later. So if he is one with the Father, if he is the one who conquered death and did miracles, then I'm placing my faith in him, not as just my savior or as my teacher, the way I would say, yeah, Gary Vee, that's an influencer of mine, but he's literally my Lord. He is who I follow. And it becomes more of a relationship in the same way that my son has a relationship with me as his father. I have a relationship with Jesus in the same way. So that looks like prayer. That looks like meditation. That looks like reading the Bible. And it becomes alive. It's really weird. It's hard to explain it, but
he's almost like the ultimate personal development guru.
That's a way to the ultimate personal development guru who doesn't just do stuff for my benefit,
Who's not,
which he does.
He's not trying to sell you. He's not trying to sell you a $2,000 marketing course.
That's the way to put it. He's not trying to sell me a $2,000 marketing course. And he also addresses this issue that every other kind of worldview and world system acknowledges, but no one adequately addresses it, which is, if we look at the world, there's evil in the world. There's bad things happening to good people. There's just bad stuff. And it's really us falling short and us being jacked up as people. And he addresses that. And that's the issue of sin. And sin meaning that we are imperfect creatures. We fall short. Sometimes we do it on accident. Sometimes we do it willfully. And he addresses that by going to the cross and dying the death we should have died, right? And so not only does he do the heart change.
All right, that part. So when you say he died for our sins, like what I explain that to me.
So if we examine our own heart against God's standards, right? Jesus said, the law says like don't murder. We know like murder is wrong, right? We can look at like what's happening socially with some of these cops killing unarmed people, and we're like, that is wrong. That should not happen, right? Murder, right? And obviously with the police brutality thing, there's nuance and there's different cases. But when something like George Floyd happens, we look and we say that's wrong. Somebody got murdered. That should not have happened. That shouldn't have played out that way. Well, Jesus says that if you hate your brother, that you've committed murder in your heart, right? Which is like, whoa, if you hate somebody, you've committed murder. That's radical. Then Jesus says, if you've looked at a woman lustfully, you have committed adultery in your heart. We know that cheating in a marriage is not good. We know that infidelity is not good. We know it leads to divorce, right? He says, if you looked at a woman lustfully, you've committed adultery, which is like, whoa, well, that means everybody's guilty. That means everybody has fallen short.
I'm definitely guilty.
Right? So no other worldview acknowledges, how do we deal with that, right? And we're talking about a perfect being. We're talking about a perfect being that's outside of our concept of time, outside of our linear start to finish, outside of our understanding. How does a broken, sinful, fallen person stand before a perfect, holy God without there being some type of penalty paid. Somebody had to do that, right? And if you're a murderer and an adulterer and you've done all these wicked crimes and you go before a judge, a good judge is going to sentence that person. A good judge isn't going to let a murderer walk away. A good judge is going to say, no, I got to send you to prison, because if I don't, that makes me an unjust judge. In the same way, a good, just God has to do something with the Hitlers and the Nazis. But let's take it a step further. What about the people that hate others in their heart? What about the people that committed? He has to do something. And so Jesus says, listen, I'm going to live the life that you couldn't live, the perfect life, but I'm also going to die the death that you should have died. The penalty of sin, the penalty of that judge, the justice we all should have gotten, Jesus takes that on the cross, and therefore we can now be in a right standing with God, because he takes our unrighteousness to the cross in a miracle, and then he gives us his righteousness. So now when God looks at those of us who are in Christ, he doesn't see sinners and adulterers and murderers and liars and thieves. He sees Jesus, because that's what happens. It's called substitutionary penal atonement. I know that's a big word. It just means that Jesus died in our place on the cross. And no one deals with that. No other worldview actually addresses that issue. So not only does he give me a new heart, a new life, new desires, new motivations, personal guru, everything you said, but he also deals with this issue of, gosh, if I really look at it and I really examine my own heart, examine my own motives, examine my own thoughts, I'm kind of a cruddy person, right? And he transforms me, but he also deals with that. And so I think that's pretty amazing. And I'm stoked that, like, I get to go to heaven.
So what do you think happens when we die?
I don't know, right? I don't know. So let me just say that. That is where, this is faith, right? So faith is the belief in something outside of our reality here in the now. So I don't know. What I think happens is that we are absent from this physical body, and our spirits go to be somewhere else, or your soul or your spirit. And I think there's a heaven, which is eternity with God, and I think there's a hell, which is, people freak out about hell. Hell is just separation from God, right? If God is a good God, he's not going to force people to be with him that don't want to be with him, right? That's why I said that question of, if Christianity is true, would you follow it? If Jesus is who he says he is, would you follow it? That's a heavy question, because why, if you don't want to follow Jesus, why would he want you to be with him in eternity in the afterlife? That's kind of like that's a very forced relationship. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
So the idea that, has made the most sense to me is this concept that, consciousness is like it's like a frequency, right? Like, and our bodies are like radio stations picking up that frequency. And as you develop consciousness, like, think about it. When you're a baby, you're not immediately conscious. Like, it's something you develop. So like, I just, like, to me, my theory is, like, as the brain develops, it tunes into that frequency that ends up being your consciousness. And then when you die, it's like, it's like that radio station, like went away or something. And then it's just back out in the ether until it gets picked up by a new radio station. And that would be kind of like my theory of, like, reincarnation. So, like, maybe.
So you would say the frequency, I would say the spirit, you would call it consciousness frequency. You would say that frequency kind of transcends into something else. And I would say that frequency goes to be with God or in some type of afterlife setting. That would be kind of like the differences. That, I mean, I've heard a lot of people say that.
I feel like religion is almost just like a personification of, like, this thing that's too big for us to understand, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. And I think religion is us trying to make sense of God. And us
do you think religion is a metaphor? Or do you think are these real people? Like,
well, Jesus was a real person. That's what I'm saying. Like, Jesus was a real person.
But like the game Telephone, where, like, you tell a story to someone and then they tell it to someone else, and by the time you're on, like, the fifth person, like, it's a completely different story. How do we know that Jesus wasn't just this, like, normal dude, and then these stories got, like, spread into something different?
So I'm not like an expert on this. What I
Yeah.
would say is based on the number of manuscripts, right? So you're talking about one story being passed to one person, being passed on to one person.
Yeah.
That's not how the historical documents of the New Testament scriptures, which a lot of people, historians and scholars, find accurate, and also the secular writings of Josephus. It wasn't one person to one person. It was multiple copies of multiple copies of multiple
So they had
copies of these.
documentation.
They have documentation, but it's
Yeah.
not just like I give you a copy and then you give somebody a copy. No, I make
Mhm.
50 copies and I pass it down to all the churches, and then these
Yeah.
people pass it down. So when we look at the writings specifically of the New Testament, there are more manuscripts for the writings of the New Testament than there are for Shakespeare, than there are for Aristotle, than there are for, right? All these things, we would never
Mhm.
question Shakespeare. If Shakespeare was real, we would never question that. But
Yeah.
there's actually more manuscripts and more whether a historical book is deemed accurate is based on the number of manuscripts there are around it. And when you compare all these manuscripts, by and large, they're like
It's got the
99%
largest
the
sample.
same. You got the
Yeah.
largest sample, right?
Yeah.
And so so again, I would revert back to like those of you guys that are real. I'm not an expert on this stuff, but those of you guys that are really curious on like how do we form that Jesus was real? How do we form that he actually did these things and all that? There's an entire system of how scholars look at it, and you would be very hard pressed to find a scholar today that would be like, yeah, Jesus didn't existed, or Jesus wasn't around with the actual ministry. Now there's a lot of disputes on did he literally rise from the dead, right? I think there's enough precedent that there is, and I think the New Testament is a good foundation to start, but I also think there's other writers like Josephus and other people outside of Scripture who are not Christian writers, by the way, who account for these things, that Jesus was a real person, he died, he rose, and there was this huge movement started after him. Again, Case for Christ on Netflix. Highly, highly, highly recommend everybody to check that movie out. And it's just a good movie too, by the way. Like it's one of the best like Christian movies out there. But yeah, Case for Christ, incredible, incredible movie.